Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Darsh,
And I'm Dr. Altamash
and welcome to Medicine Redefined,
a podcast where we will explore the often overlooked but necessary components of health, what we consider to be the fundamentals.
We will investigate topics and practices that can give you and your patients the best chance to optimize a healthy lifestyle. It's time to move the needle forward and put the health back in healthcare.
All right, guys, welcome back to another progress note. Progress note number 9, to be specific. On today's agenda, we have AI. We're talking about artificial intelligence, specifically Neuralink. For those of you who don't know, these are in the category of brain-machine interfaces. So we'll talk about that, its medical applications, our thoughts, and all the exciting things in the future. We're also going to talk about Dr. GuPTa. We've been hearing a lot of noise about Dr. GuPTa and what that means for us, our jobs, our thoughts on that. And if you stick around to the end, we'll also give you the blueprint for anti-aging. You guys might have heard of Bryan Johnson and all the shenanigans he's up to. So make sure you listen through and enjoy the episode.
What's up, man?
Hey, buddy. How's it going?
Good, man. I can't complain. Well, I can complain a little bit. Just got a lot of call to look forward to this weekend. Just got off call last night. So I'm a little tired, but excited to be here. Always excited to talk about, I think, what today's theme is going to be, at least the future of healthcare a little bit and technology. So
isn't that what we've been doing for 2.5 years? At least talking about the future of healthcare.
I
thought that's what we were doing.
True. I guess that's what the arrow represents in our logo.
Yeah. All this time offline, we were talking about the future, and I guess today's the first time we'll do it. No, different technology. Yeah, I'm trying to think. Like, have we? I don't think we've done our fair share of technology stuff. We did talk to Rummy, right? Talk about a little bit about health tech, although that was more philosophical in terms of how to think about it.
Yeah.
We'll touch on that a little bit, but we got to get somebody
some wearable
from an engineering background, I think.
Yeah.
Wearable stuff. We've done some wearable stuff. That's fair. Yeah.
Hopefully, I mean, for the audience, we'll have some AI episodes coming out hopefully soon. But yeah, getting some like biomed engineering or something as far as the futuristic kind of stuff that people are working on. I actually had a lecture today for Grand Rounds about, it was from like an aerospace hand function perspective of a researcher, just looking at kind of prosthetics and different things about hand function and kind of the future of it. So that was kind of interesting.
Yeah. Believe it or not, I've had at least 2 people who are in the healthcare space reach out to me, some colleagues, and ask for AI related episodes. I was like, hey, do you have something in the pipeline coming for this? Because maybe patients are asking them about it, and other people. I was like, yeah, believe it or not. So, but where there is demand. So, anyways, I think you reached out to me a couple of days ago and were like, hey, let's talk about some of the current trends, which is kind of what we touched on a couple of PNs ago that we're going to do, but really bridging into AI, something that's really, really hot right now. ChatGPT is almost old news at this point, and then you have all the other ones that are coming up. The most recent one is Dr. GuPTa, right?
Yeah, from a medical perspective. Yeah,
add a little bit what that means for our jobs, job security, and then Neuralink. Neuralink's been around for a little time, so wherever you would like to start. The second one is more interesting to me. Just
Neuralink
is the punchline. yeah. I think that's more meaningful to me. I maybe the first one's, to be honest with you, the first one's more terrifying, and the second one's more interesting. If I had to put one adjective to both of them.
You know what's funny? I think if you ask a layperson or a patient, they'd say the opposite. They probably say Neuralink is terrifying, but Dr. GuPTa is somewhat hopeful. But let's start with Neuralink.
So maybe let's start.
Oh wait, what do you want to talk?
Yeah, I was going to say the exact opposite, but no. Let's start with Neuralink.
Okay.
But I will come back to, but that makes sense to me because Dr. GuPTa is just a natural trajectory of where things are going, right? Since the advent of the internet, WebMD, Google, being able to figure, Google your symptoms and whatnot. Dr. GuPTa is the next step. It's the next logical step. But anyways, let's talk about Neuralink, right? What I'll do is maybe I'll just kind of define what, for those who don't know, Neuralink is a specific company, but essentially it's, I don't want to say it's the first one, but it was founded in 2016 by Elon Musk, right? So a neurotechnology company. The primary goal was to develop implantable technology, and what they call these are brain-machine interfaces or brain-computer interfaces. They basically, you have artificial intelligence that interacts with with human brains, right? And maybe even other external devices. And at least the vision behind Musk's company, and really a lot of these, is to kind of enhance human cognition and address some of the neurological disorders and disabilities by harnessing the capability of artificial intelligence. And so some key points I think worth understanding is, so maybe a brain machine interfaces, implicitly I think we understand what that is, but it's a communication pathway, right, between the brain and the external devices and this artificial intelligence. And the way that they work is like they have they will use the signals from every single neuron. And I think different companies might work slightly differently. I don't. This is where we need an expert to come in. But they'll use signals from neurons, and this implantable device could be in a part of your brain, or it could be somewhere. I don't think it'd be in the peripheral nervous system because that wouldn't make sense. So it has to be somewhere in the central nervous system.
Yeah.
Specifically for Neuralink, right? They have these electrodes, which are like tiny little threads the size of a human hair, that can be implanted into the brain. And so that it's like quote unquote minimally invasive, although what brain surgery is minimally invasive? And they do this by the surgical robot, but I don't think specifics of that are worth it. But what is interesting to me specifically is the brain mapping component of it, right? So what we know is the brain, I think, more so than any other organ in the body, is the most complex, right? And not only is it the most complex, but really there's no part of the brain that doesn't have a profound function. Yeah, every organ does, but there are a lot of different organs that maybe if you lose a part of it or you lose an organ entirely, like you can do without, i.e. kidney, right? You can do without a kidney. You can do without an adrenal gland. You can do without a lot of different things like that. But you lose some part of the brain, you're going to have some type of dysfunction, right? And so every single part of the brain has a critical function in terms of how we interact with our environment, how we optimally behave. And so brain mapping creates like different blueprints, so to speak, and it helps us understand how different regions of the brain communicate with each other and how we can analyze this activity to decode and interpret the signals that can be sent out to external devices, and how we can use that to enhance our lifestyles. And we can imagine how these can have lots of medical applications, which we can talk about, and also ethical considerations, which is kind of the scary part that you were alluding to, that the general lay population might have. So
Yeah.
that's the background.
Yeah. I'll start with Musk is absolutely probably my favorite tech leader entrepreneur, just because he's always pushing the limits, right? And a lot of people are terrified, and hate him or love him. People have their opinions based off kind of how he handles things in a political sense, his home sense, technology, Twitter, all that. But if you put that all aside, I just think his vision is all about making humanity thrive, right? And I think the cool thing about Neuralink is that it relates closely to what we do, right? I mean, through our residency, we're seeing patients where if you take Musk's vision, I mean, he's looking at spinal cord patients, right? Those who are paraplegics, tetraplegic, hoping that an implantable chip can at least get them to process, move their arms, move their limbs, and also work, like you said, externally with a prosthetic limb. You can also look at patients with like ALS or other neurological disorders where if they're going to be, losing their ability to speak or something, they're now can control their thoughts kind of with an interface. And so they can now communicate to whoever they need to just by their thoughts. You can also see this with like cerebral palsy. So now you're seeing, hey, yeah, I have a child with cerebral palsy having difficulty with walking. Well, maybe this chip can at least train them. And when you can map out the neurons, understand exactly to a T almost what it takes to get somebody to learn and then also walk. So I think the possibilities there are super cool. And, just for the audience to realize, Musk, he says it's like having a Fitbit in your brain, right? So it's just like you said, you have this internal device that's kind of maneuvering all the neurons within your brain and the circuits and the mapping, but then it also kind of has like these updates from the outside, which are collecting data, but then also can input the data in there. So obviously, I mean, this is way beyond our pay grade, and to understand kind of the engineering and all that is way beyond. But I just think it's so fascinating. And currently, they're working on animals, dogs, pigs, mice. Obviously, there haven't been any human clinical trials that got rejected by the FDA. I think they last year tried to try to get FDA clearance for at least starting human clinical trials. And this, I guess, leads into kind of the ethical components of things.
Well, so that's what's interesting, right? So Neuralink hasn't made progress on it, but there are other companies, competitors, who actually um, have come further along in terms of getting FDA approval. So another competitor, when I was Googling this, was like Paradromics or somebody that came one step closer to getting FDA approval. There's another company based out of Utah or somewhere in the Midwest where BlackRock, and they've implanted a couple of these devices in a few dozen people. I don't know if you heard about that.
No, I haven't.
And it sounds like, they're doing it for all the people that you mentioned. I did read a case study about an individual with ALS who had this implanted. Things that are even quote unquote simpler than that, neurological issues. When something that's been pretty hot right now when it comes to neurological disorders are conversations about Alzheimer's disease, right? When we talk about the health and wellness space and fitfluencers and all that kind of stuff, talking about ApoE, and especially, with the Limitless series that came out.
Yeah.
And of course, Alzheimer's is a disease where it impacts your memory, but it also robs the individual of their personality and a lot of other aspects of, their neurology, right? So in terms of how they behave, in terms of how they function, in terms of just how they interact with the world, in terms of what their daily tasks, in terms of how they behave, just their personality and their affect and whatnot. And other diseases that are very, very common, the neurodegenerative disease such as Parkinson's, but even more basic than that, cerebral vascular disease, right? We see people in stroke patients. I mean, think about all the kinds of aphasias that we see and we learn
Yeah.
about. That's high yield for us. So for those who don't know, aphasias are just like speech disorders. Is that a fair way to say it?
Yeah. Speech impairments in a way.
Speech impairments, right? And so oftentimes when somebody has a stroke, a part of your brain is going to be affected where you're going to have difficulty with expressive speech, right? Or you might have difficulty with receptive speech. So you can imagine things like a Broca's aphasia where expressive speech is a problem, but these individuals understand everything perfectly fine. But that connection between understanding and getting it out, that one is the one that's interrupted. If you had a device like this, you could completely circumvent that, right? Same thing with an anomic aphasia where somebody has difficulty coming up with the exact word that they're trying to communicate. I feel like I have this all the time, but right. If you had something like this BMI, brain machine interface, where you can completely circumvent that situation, what that might mean for somebody in terms of interacting with society and their function, it can be pretty profound. And this one it kind of hits home with me because, again, this, that I am become familiar with this with somebody in my family who's kind of struggled with this. And so that was something that I'm like, hey, I'm incredibly excited with this. It is a double-edged sword, though, like the ethical condition that you're talking about in terms of invasions of privacy, right? Because who is going to be able to, like, anytime you have artificial intelligence, you have technology that's hackable, right? That's you can monitor that, and it's like, all right, so if the output can be interpreted by everybody, then not only can I communicate with you through this BMI, but somebody 3 miles from me can listen to that conversation, and what does that mean? So that's a scary piece of it. I don't know.
I agree. You know what's
I don't know
funny?
if that
So
makes sense.
I don't know if you saw this recent news article about how they're finding DNA like in the air, like human DNA in the air. So like in the water.
No.
So apparently they've like some research team has found like human DNA like in the middle of the air that you can just collect. And that's raising privacy concerns, right? So like for people to just think about if that is a huge issue as far as like where people are or what they've been doing and who it is. I mean, this is like on another level, given that it's your thoughts. You can trace like once we have the knowledge and the understanding of kind of how these brain patterns work, and it's kind of like almost reading braille, right? Like a certain sequence of function equals x, and so if you hack that code which your brain produces, you now can create a story out of that with the wording. And so I think it's pretty freaky to think about, kind of like the sci-fi, but I mean, hey, that's the way the world's going.
Yeah, and then the next, maybe not the logical progression, but the malicious progressions would be is then you can manipulate those thoughts too, right?
Right.
Which is kind of why I thought it was interesting that you used the word maneuver. I wouldn't use that word right now because I think maneuver has the implication that you can manipulate, right? If you're actually maneuvering, maybe maneuvering around neurons, so to speak. But that's actually, Elon Musk has brought up these concerns with OpenAI and ChatGPT about how, hey, actually that's my understanding is one of the reasons he's pushing this is because he's saying we have to evolve with artificial intelligence, otherwise it's going to be
Taking over
it's
us.
going to destroy us all.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't know. I haven't really heard him speak on it. I've only just read about different things. So Yeah, I got to look more into it, but certainly cool. I did listen to the episode of this gentleman. It was a neurosurgeon on Huberman's podcast
Yes.
who came and talked about Neuralink in detail. Who has an implantable device apparently in his fingertip somehow,
Hmm.
where he opens. Yeah. Well, I don't think it's specifically a BMI, but he can open doors and like locks with that thing.
Wild. It's just crazy to
Yep.
think. But
Yeah, he's never. It was funny because he said that he hasn't, like for years now or for some time, he hasn't had to use a key, and so his wife asked him to put one in her as well, and so he did that.
what is he
So
like?
there,
Quote.
he says in his words, their version of wedding rings.
Wow. Is he quote unquote normal? Like he doesn't have any type of dysfunction or
No,
anything
not at
like
all.
that. Wow.
Nope.
He's just a
This is
normal guy walking
nope.
around with a chip.
Self experimentation. Yep.
Wow. Incredible. Well, yeah, I mean, I'm just excited to see how this develops. We're going to hear more about it throughout this year, next year. As AI develops, this will develop. So we'll probably have another PN on this down the road as far as updates go and kind of what we can educate the audience on with what we learn.
Absolutely. Hopefully an expert to come.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, should we transition then to the second topic that we alluded to, which is Dr. GuPTa?
Yes. Skrelly.
Martin Shkreli, that guy, scumbag, is what most people would refer him to. So I guess I'll just give the intro here since I started.
Yeah. You already have a biased opinion.
That's right. So, okay, Dr. GuPTa, the first time I heard about this, I thought they were talking about Dr. Sanjay Gupta. And I was like, wait, this guy is now like an artificial intelligent like person just giving out medical advice. I think that's the normal rational thought that most people would have, maybe not. But you look more into this, and it's called Dr. GuPTa because the letters GPT are in GuPta, right? So it makes for a cool name there when you go on the website and those three letters are capitalized. But for those who don't know, Martin Shkreli is the guy who created Dr. GuPta. And his backstory is that he's essentially a biotech bro, pharma bro is what they call him, who recently got sentenced to prison, just got released. But because he was creating a monopoly on a drug, and I believe the drug was for toxoplasmosis, and he had some illegal activity. A lot of people were angry because he was just selling the drug at such a high price and nobody could really compete. And so, the court obviously found him guilty, sentenced him for, I believe, 7 years. And he kind of recently got out. And this was his first creation coming out of prison. He was like, you know what? I need to create a medical chat GPT for people to be diagnosed because WebMD and Google just aren't doing it apparently.
Right. Yeah, and I think there's some good to it. Well,
you've tried it, right?
His point is, I did, yeah. I played around with it. Only 5 questions, but I wasn't that impressed, to be honest with you, because I think, well, what was annoying about it, and I don't really know what the paid version is. Maybe it's just more enhanced and more comprehensive and faster. For one, it was very, very slow, and 2, every single response had a disclaimer after it. So I thought that was a little bit annoying. It was like, oh, check with your healthcare professional. Did you check with your healthcare professional? It was very annoying. And it also prompts you with the follow-up questions. So it's very, what's the word? It gives me that feel of like when I'm going to talk to Verizon and I go through their chat, customer service chat. Like it gave me that type of feel. So it didn't really quite feel like, it made me feel like my job was secure. But he did mention that, in his opinion, like a lot of physical professionals in terms of our profession, like physicians and whatnot, are not going to be necessary. I think maybe I read a quote at some point where he's saying that, my kids or the kids of the future generation are going to ask why physicians were necessary, or like why we ever needed them, which I thought was interesting. And so that was the part that I was coming out. I was like, I was a little terrifying because, we talked to, we had GuPTa come on, and I was like, hey man, like, are we not going to have physicians? And in my initial thought was, there's no way that they're going to be able to replace us. But then I've been thinking about this for quite some time, and I do think there are a lot of things that could be streamlined from this, right? So if we think about, especially in the COVID era, where a lot of practices had and just urgent cares and whatnot, triage medicine, right? Where you can say, hey, is this an emergency? Is it not an emergency? Those types of people we can do televisits. You can make an assessment visually and just from symptoms in terms of respiratory things and just infectious stuff. Does it need to get checked out or not? Does it just need a quick course of antiviral? Does it need hydration? That kind of stuff. That's pretty straightforward. And if everything is, which unfortunately this is another knock of, we talked about Peter Valenzuela about this, is that if things are starting to head towards this algorithm based approach, well, why can't a machine just follow the algorithm, right? Where is the thought provoking conversation? Where's the nuance? Where is the calculated decision making that a human brain actually needs to do, where a machine can do that just as easily if you just follow the algorithm? And I think for a lot of different things, it's gonna be possible. So I could see it having some utility. I could see it, the case being made that healthcare is too expensive, and this is going to help cut some of those costs. In the long run, will be better for society, particularly in areas where there is a physician shortage, right?
Yeah, speaking about algorithms, right? I mean, that's kind of already happening from the insurance standpoint when it comes to insurance companies trying to dictate how long somebody has at rehab, right? I mean, they're just plugging in the metrics. They're plugging in the labs, they're plugging in the age, the ICD-10 codes, and spitball out a number. And there's no human thought behind this as far as actually this person could probably do really well with about 3 weeks of therapy. They're like, yeah, I don't know, we'll give them 2 days. You're like, what? Okay, and then there's nothing you can do to fight it because the insurance companies have a proprietary algorithm, right? And that's what they're going off of. So you're arguing against AI now, which to them is 100% always going to be right. So I guess that's kind of the downside of where that algorithm comes into play. But there's always been, this tussle between insurance companies and kind of doctors, et cetera. But I did want to ask you, when you did Dr. GuPTa, did you just ask free range prompts, or did you actually input like some of your data, age, all that, labs?
I put my no, I didn't put my labs and stuff. I put my age, my height, my weight. I didn't want to put all like the protected health information, because that
Yeah,
has been one of the concerns. I remember reading an
right.
article
HIPAAs.
by
Yeah,
a health law, yeah, the attorney, to do that, and that can get especially tricky. So no, I didn't go. I didn't maybe get the full user experience that I was anticipating. I just put free prompt of like, hey, what should I expect from something like this? And so that being said, I do have some friends though who've recently been mentioning that they put it in for some stuff and it's been quite helpful. So it also, it also depends on where it's your background, like where are you coming from, what's your baseline level of knowledge. If you don't know anything, then you're gonna ask some, you know, pretty rudimentary questions, and it's going to give you those answers, right? But if you ask more in-depth, more complicated questions, it's going to say, oh, follow up with your healthcare professional, it could be this, it could be this. Like, okay, that's not helpful. I already knew that. So
absolutely. Yeah. So I told you, I was speaking to Mira about this, right? After our conversation with Joe Bucky, we were talking about like, will AI replace doctors or not? And I was kind of in the camp of like, I think they will. And one of the concerns that people say is that, well, an AI can't really show empathy, right? But there are companies out there who are trying to solve the mental health problem and try to create a human interface, at least a human software that can read emotion and give back emotion as well. Just so the number of mental health people out there suffering from mental health, I should say, are able to see somebody, even if it's AI. But my wife Mira brought up a good point in the sense that a lot of people are afraid to disclose information to another human being, right? It's almost like, although doctors take care of vulnerable patients, there still might be this, somewhat of a something in the air that doesn't feel comfortable. And obviously, from a male to female perspective, so like today I'm in the pain clinic, worked with a physician who primarily deals with pelvic pain, and so I had like a 17-year-old come in and just like very flat affect with me, did not want to divulge, head down. And then obviously, as soon as the female attending comes in, she kind of perks up and able to speak. And I mean, you'll see that anyways, and given the age. But I wonder if you substituted me with, let's say, a male AI or even a female AI, how much would that patient just be willing to interact with that, especially growing up with technology, being on phones all the time and stuff? It's almost second nature. So I don't know, just kind of a thought that we were discussing.
sure, saying be more willing to be more vulnerable.
Right, right. Maybe disclosing more information.
Yeah, I can I can see it going either way. Really, I suppose it depends on the person.
Yeah.
I think for people of the older generation who are not as intimately familiar, didn't grow up walking around with their phones stuck to their face,
Yeah.
very much like we are in the generation below us. Kind of what Musk is, right? That's his point. Is like, hey, we're walking around like zombies anyway, so we have to. So for the older folks who are still willing to pick up the phone and call people, it's so funny that we do that. I was on my way here and I had to call one of my students, one of my mentees for something, for a project we're working on, and I picked up the phone. I called her, and we're playing phone tag back and forth. And when we finally got in touch, I told her immediately. I said, "Hey, don't ever feel pressure to pick up the phone call when I call you, or call me back immediately, because you know how it is. Like if an attendant
Yeah.
calls you, you're like, oh my god, I got to
Oh
call
yeah.
back ASAP, no matter how busy you are, right?" And I don't want her to pressure like that. And I said, just because I'm the person, I like to pick up the phone and call. I'm not a huge fan. We talked about this, you and I,
Yeah, yeah.
and I'm not like huge on texting, especially because I'm driving and doing things, and so at that point I'm like knocking out phone calls.
Yeah.
So so it'll matter. And so for me, I could, it would depend on if I was actually talking to a robot or not. But for me, that human connection is very, very meaningful, which is
Mhm.
why I think that, in past, when I've tried to identify talking to somebody like a therapist, I've gone through multiple peoples, because I think building that connection is very, very important.
Yeah.
But yeah, I could also see the conspiracy theories from the back end saying who's behind the robot listening,
Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah.
and then like even more reluctant to share their information, because there's certainly somebody's pulling the strings of that robot. So I don't know. That's very, very interesting.
Yeah, and I'm with you on the sense that, like, for me, talking to patients, I mean, I can talk about things outside of medicine too, right? That builds that rapport. I had an older couple yesterday as well, 67 years married, asked him the secret. We joked around for a little bit. And that, just elevated kind of the happiness in the room. Whereas if you're doing it with AI, you can't really divulge into the personal life of the AI. It's just strictly going to be algorithmic and just black and white and to the point, which, some people are going to prefer that. But like you said, I think the old timers are going to want to have that rapport, enjoy kind of just talking up somebody and then getting down to what the nitty gritty is.
Yeah, yeah. We talked to Sarah Pospos about this way back when, right? Because in her field of psychiatry, where I think I asked her how how quick is she, or how often does she become vulnerable with her patients, where she'll share her own personal story, right? Because she's had a backstory, and we've all been through some hardships. And I forget who I saw, maybe it was on Dr. Mike's show or somebody, talking about patients, particularly with chronic disease. Like, for instance, I think the anecdote this physician on social media gave was that he, if he's telling a patient that who has diabetes, and that they need to do their finger sticks, and they need to check their glucose and monitor that, because that's going to be important. And the next time the patient comes in and says, "Hey, I didn't do it," and when you ask that patient how come, the patient might say, "Well, doc, you have no idea what it feels like to stick your finger all day every day to be able to check that." And in that moment, he shared with the patient that, "Hey, actually, I do. I've been doing it for the last 20 years." So obviously, you've shared with the patient that you are a diabetic, or you have metabolic dysfunction of some sort, right? But when you unveil the curtain in that respect, all of a sudden, that therapeutic alliance, right, the phrase that we love, or at least I love, is you build that instantaneously, which I'm not really sure any amount of time spent else could do that. Because now the person's like, because again, we've talked about this, we're so tribal in nature, no matter what we do, no matter how open minded we do, it's just, I don't know, it's so innate.
Yeah.
So AI can't do that, to your point. So I'm just kind of elaborating further on that, which is why I'm not sure. Does that make sense? What do you think about that?
No, yeah, I see it both sides, right? I think, like, as a society, as humans, there's a race now, right, to longevity and to anti-aging. So there's a true race to figure out a blueprint, right? And so let's you just want to go into like our next segments, because I can talk about this at least as far as like a story that people should at least keep their eyes on.
Whatever you want to do.
Let's do
Yeah,
that. All right.
let's go
So
to the next
something
segment.
new that we're going to do on this podcast. Altamash will come with a story. I'll come with a story. It can be a gripe, something happy, something we're doing, whatever. And we're going to share it with each other, and then we're just going to have our thoughts. So this actually leads in perfectly. So you know about Bryan Johnson? Yes, you've heard
I
about.
just listened to him on the podcast the other day.
Oh, with Kohlberg. Gotcha. Yeah. So he's also like a trending guy right now, right? So for the past like year, he spent about $2 million on trying to solve anti-aging, not necessarily longevity, I'd say, but really anti-aging. And I think this is the way the world is moving towards, is trying to solve how we can live longer and how we can live better, because we're finally at the tipping point where we believe it's possible. Like, I don't think people 20 years ago thought about, like, they had the idea about it, but they probably never thought practically that, okay, we're at the cusp where we can solve technology to make this happen. But now you're seeing people do this, right? And so Bryan Johnson, for people who don't know, he created Venmo, sold that to PayPal, and now has gone on a transformative journey to really solve anti-aging. And so, yeah, if you look at pictures of him from like 10 years ago to now, it looks drastically different. He looks like Christian Bale from American Psycho, almost like porcelain skin, um, has this routine down. And again, he spent $2 million. He takes 100 supplements a day, and he's really tracking everything he does. Right. And so his vision and his goal is solving anti-aging and creating a blueprint for every individual. Right. So it's not just what he does is going to work for you or it's going to work for me or whoever else whoever else is listening, but looking at the metrics, looking at the biomarkers, what are the things that we have to do to now look at it as more of a complex picture, but also see, again, AI, algorithms, code. What is the code? If I input this, what comes out, right? And when you have enough of that, you get more and more answers, which essentially is what deep learning is. And so I think Bryan Johnson has merged together this field of AI, this field of futuristic thinking, as well as now medicine and health, and kind of combine them all to really just figure out what he can do to live longer. And his biological age now is like 5 years less than what it was. His testosterone's like 20 years less than his normal age. I think he's like 50 years old or something. I mean, the dude looks like he's like 25, like 30, I should say. But it's pretty impressive.
I had never seen a picture of him. Yeah, I just Googled him right now. He's actually shredded. Yeah, he looks great. I don't know how old he is, but I would not guess he's more than, I would not even say he's in his 40s by looking at him. So that's fantastic. Yeah, the other thing I think he had mentioned, yeah, we got to look this up. But the other thing that I do recall him mentioning is his rate of aging. He had decreased it by 31 years or something like that, which I'm not really sure exactly what that means. Oh, this is interesting that he's sharing all his
Shares it all.
data after 18 months of adherence with Blueprint.
Yeah.
Like on the actual website.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like his ALT, BMI.
Follow him on Twitter too, man. So he just posted today. He's like 800-pound leg press, 1 rep max. He just did a 240 bench press, 1 rep max. His VO2 max is like a 50, and he compares it all to an 18-year-old.
53.6.
Yeah, compares it all to an 18-year-old.
3.6 is very, very good.
Yeah, it's insane. Yeah. He's in the top 1% of like 18-year-olds, right? And he said the reason he does 18 is because that's when the ACSM uses that age as the point of decline for a lot of metrics. So he's trying to be obviously at the elite level, 18. And it's just very impressive what he's doing. He's got a lot of haters out there because, people are going to hate on anything, obviously, about living his life and stuff. But yeah, I mean,
what's the biggest, like, the gripe that people have for him? Like, like, I don't understand. Like,
I think
that he's spending too much money? I mean, I can imagine. But yeah.
So there's a couple things.
I'm not following him.
Yeah, there's a couple things. One is this guy spending $2 million a year on himself, and he expects that everyone else can afford the same thing, right? So he's like, why are we even doing this experimentation? I think Erika even said, I think you're a little bit too far ahead of the market and stuff.
Too early, yeah.
But the thing is,
does he though? Does he expect that everybody can do this?
So yes and no, right? Because his biggest thing is you can take one step at a time, even if it's a little bit of a step, it's something in the right direction. But with anything in technology, the price is going to come down to whatever it is, right? But somebody needs to start somewhere.
Yeah.
So like in my perspective, I'm for it. Like I love seeing that he's trying to advance our knowledge on anti-aging through, again, everything, supplements, working out, all this stuff, and increasing the science and knowledge that we have in order to one day make it commoditized to everyone else. So that's like one gripe that people have. The second is kind of just like, people are, instead of living his type of life, they want to go out, party all the time, do things. Like, dude, just live your life. Like, why are you doing this? Why are you making your family do this? Because his son is like completely bought in to this lifestyle as well. Like he'll go to school with like 3 pounds of veggies and stuff, but he's like, it's the son's choice. His son's like 16 or 8, something like that. But it's like completely bought in.
Interesting. Yeah. I thought what was interesting, the question that I've texted you or the insight that I've texted you a couple of times, maybe something that Lex Friedman was the first person who I heard who it made sense to me, is like all these people that, if you hadn't grinded early on in his life, because when Erika asked him, like, what was your, what was the reason? Like, what was the motivating factor for all this? He talked about just grinding and hustle culture and shitty marriage and being depression. What do you call it? Like nighttime Bryan?
Yeah. Evening Bryan. Yeah.
Evening Bryan. Yeah, so Evening Bryan was a manifestation of his unhealthy relationships with his wife, with his children, and really with himself, right? And presumably if he had taken care of those relationships from the start, he wouldn't be spending so much time at this juncture overcorrecting, right? Letting that pendulum swing so aggressively to the opposite side. And that really spoke to me, and I think tends to be interesting because it's a double-edged sword in terms of having to grind early on so you are in a privileged position enough where you can do something like that down the road. Maybe I should elaborate a little bit further because there might be some people who are wondering, what the hell is he talking about? Well, I'm referring to all these wellness influencers and everybody, maybe not influencers because that tends to be a bad word, but all these respectable individuals, like, people we talk about often, Lee Norton, we talk about Peter Attia, we talk about Huberman, and even folks in the academic sector who are leaders in the field of, and scientists who are pushing the bounds when it comes to redefining healthcare and making more of a health-based model rather than a sick-based model. They're in the position that they are is because they made the sacrifices of not taking care of their health. I don't want to make a broad brush, paint everybody with that type of statement, but they are pretty open with their journey and how hard they worked and how they gained these experiences in their 20s, maybe even in their 30s, which puts them in a position to be interesting enough where they have a platform where people want to bring them on for conversations, for interviews, for the lessons that they've learned, for the wisdom that they've acquired, right? So had they been spending their 20s in deflecting some of those experiences to be able to care for their health, to be able to go to bed at 9:30 at night, to be able to get 8 hours of sleep, they wouldn't be in that position down the road. I heard Sahil Bloom talk about this earlier this morning on Chris Hutchins' show, where he's in a position in life that if anybody offered him $50 million to work 80 hours per week, he would not do it. He wouldn't even think about it twice. Yep. And I paused for a second. I said, wait, hold on a second. You're telling me that if I get $50 million for this year and just to grind it out for 80 hours per week, and then you don't have to do anything after that. And so it's short-term sacrifice for long-term gain. I mean, this is something that we're so capable of doing. Hey, heck, we've done $50,000 for 80-hour weeks, right?
Yeah, we've done it.
Exactly. So bringing it back to Bryan Johnson, I wonder if he had taken care of himself, his relationships, his priorities, because one of the things I do remember him mentioning of that his relationship with his son is so important to him, and I think he does have multiple children. So had he done a better job in his youth, would he have to as aggressively course correct? Would he have to go to the other side of taking care of his body, spending $2 million,
for sure,
getting all the blood work, spending as much time on his sleep, and guarding that as aggressively as he does say that he does. So these are the things that I think about.
Right. And so his thing is like, he's never been more conscious or quote unquote woke since doing this. Right. And he's real, like, dude, he has 100% sleep performance over the last 2 months streak. It's absolutely insane. Right. Just to think about that. So, I mean, I would never do what he's doing. Even if I had the capabilities, I would never do what he's doing. Because for me, I really do care about like the people I'm with, the people I hang out. Like, I just can't give up that lifestyle because I do crave social connection in a way, right? And I don't know how much he would feel aloof being around people, doing things. Like, it seems like his heart and soul is really just into Blueprint, which, hey, if that's his thing, that's his thing. I think it advances, and somebody's got to do the work, and maybe that's why he's doing it. But you're right about a privileged position, right? Like, you look at Sahil Bloom. I mean, dude, the guy was already pretty, I don't want to say wealthy because that's a very subjective term, but I mean, he has enough money to think about what 50 mil means, right? I mean, he makes more than $1 million now with just advertisements and his newsletters and stuff like that. But if he was not an investment banker, or he was somebody just making 50, 60K, I don't know. I think that answer might change to do 80 hours a week, because there are people out there who are working 2-3 jobs and not even closing in around 50, 60K. So
yeah, the social connection piece is very important for us to understand, because the people who've been successful, who've made the money, time and time again will tell you that that's not enough. That's not the key to happiness, so to speak. And the realization that they keep coming to is that love and connection are critical in terms of happiness. We do know that one of the key components for longevity, and when we look at the blue zones across the world, are these individuals who have deep social connection, right? They have tribes, they have a community that gives them purpose. Despite what their diets are like, what their movement and physical practice and activity is like, what their sleep patterns are like, whether or not they're eating more fat and more saturated fat or more vegetables or drinking alcohol or not. I think those are the minutia sometimes in the grand scheme of things that we're worrying about. And so I've been thinking about that piece of it a lot more and trying to emphasize that, because all these other things will take too much of your energy and oftentimes will leave you more exhausted than energizing you. And, not every single person, to your point, is like that. And some people are more introverted and that's not how they get energized. And the data and all those things tend to energize them. And so I think everybody has a little different of a purpose in life, and whatever yours is, if you find it, then you keep going after it.
And the thing is, not everyone wants to live long. I mean, there are people out there who think the world is going downhill at this point. Like, legitimately, they are afraid of humanity. And so there are people who, do the proper things, but then they feel like, oh, once their loved ones are gone, they also want to be gone around the same time. I mean, I think Peter Attia talks about this, right? About like the emotional component of health is like, what's the point of living longer if you're not going to live with the best mood? If you're not happy, why would you want to live longer and you're depressed? So, it's definitely a gray zone. But like, to each their own, right? I think if you have the option, you have the option. But yeah, I don't know.
Couldn't agree more. If you've got the time and the money, why not?
Cool. Well, hey, this was a good PN. And yeah, we'll probably have to do some updates down the road. Maybe next year we'll see what Dr. GuPTa turns it to, Neuralink, see what Bryan Johnson's biological age is. So we'll have to have some updates.
Looking forward to it.
All right, man.
All right, buddy. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Medicine Redefined. As always, we are highly appreciative of your support. And if there are any other topics that you want us to cover, or if you have any feedback for us, or just want to say hi, we are at medredefined@gmail.com and also medredefined on all the social platforms. So please feel free to reach out to us. And lastly, I want to thank our team, Ethan Ju and Erika for the help and production of this podcast. And before we sign off, do remember the important disclaimer that everything in this podcast is for educational purposes only. It does not constitute the practice of medicine, nor should it be construed as medical advice. No physician-patient relationship is formed, and anything discussed in this podcast does not represent the views of our employers. We recommend that you seek the guidance of your personal physician regarding any specific health-related issues. However, if you enjoy the show, please be sure to subscribe, review, and share with anyone who you think will gain value from this. And until next time, thank you for listening.